let's not mess around. This is the Galaxy S9 Plus review, but first, let's unbox it. G'day guys, my name is CJ, and if I can summarize the phone for all the impatient people out there, the Galaxy S9 and the S9 Plus is basically an S8s or an S8.5. But it's also a lot more in my opinion. Let's talk about it. On the surface, yes, the Galaxy S9 Plus looks exactly like its predecessor, but look closer and you'll start to see some very subtle but very welcome additions. The front still houses a beautiful 6.2-inch Super AMOLED display, which is still the best in the business. But it also does a much better job at the front in hiding the front sensor modules, so it looks a lot cleaner than the previous version. There's still a sturdy aluminium frame surrounding the entire device, but instead of having a blingy chromed out look, it's a much more sleek and elegant matte look now. In addition to looking less blingy, it's also a little less prone to scuffs as well. Also along the frames is the usual buttons that you'd find: the volume rocker, the power button, the Bixby button for better or worse, but you also find there's USB-C and also a down-firing speaker, and most importantly, a headphone jack. And so the most obvious change from the overall look of the phone is going to be on the back. So what we've got with the S9 Plus, take the Note 8's camera module, flip it 90 degrees, and that's what you'll see on the S9 Plus. And my god, does it make a huge difference when it comes to ergonomic. In a great sign of listening to its customers, the fingerprint sensor is now in a much more reachable and less awkward position than the previous model. Or in other words, it's in a position that actually makes sense. It's not quite as ergonomic as, say, a phone like the Pixel 2 or the Huawei Mate 10, but it's a much better improvement from the S8. And it's a big change because the fingerprint sensor is still going to be the primary way you're going to unlock the S9, even if there is a new intelligent scanning mode, which basically is a poor man's Face ID. It's not any more secure nor any quicker. The phone is still a glass sandwich and it's still a fingerprint magnet as a result. At least the glass rear is there for a reason, like IP68 water resistance, but more importantly, wireless charging. Something that can't be said for a phone like the Huawei Mate 10. Also, the S9 comes bundled with a clear silicone case, which again matches a trend that Chinese manufacturers are adopting. So right out of the box, you can still protect your phone whilst you wait for your favorite cases or skins. That being said, the overall subtle designs does make for a much more ergonomic experience, which can only improve the user experience. But then when talking about the experience, what's powering it? In the Aussie version and basically everywhere else around the world except for the US, we've got an Exynos 9810 or a Snapdragon 845 in the US. With the S9 Plus, it also has 6GB of RAM, giving it plenty of juice to spare. The version I've got also has 256GB of onboard storage and still supports SD card expansion up to 400GB. So in best case scenario, you've got up to 650GB of storage, which is huge. And in my opinion, the S9 Plus have put a much better first impression on me than the S8 Plus ever did. I haven't spotted a hint of lag outside of loading Bixby, which is pretty unusual considering that's stock software, and it feels incredibly snappy. Everything you throw at it, from gaming to multitasking, is an absolute breeze, and I would say it rivals the Pixel 2 at least when it comes to speed. In terms of smoothness, I'd probably still give the edge to the Pixel 2, but the S9 Plus really isn't far behind. It still uses an almost identical UI to the S8 however, so if you weren't a fan of Samsung's experience from the S8, you probably won't be a fan of the S9. For me, I didn't actually mind it, and it does still come with a lot of customization available. And it's easy enough to pixelize your phone as well with a couple of skins and a new launcher as well, which I've got. And then speaking of Bixby, it's still not particularly useful. It has some extra Bixby Vision gimmicks like using AI for object identification, slapping on makeup on your face from Sephora and then allowing you to buy straight from the app. But in terms of actual use, it's not particularly useful, and the translating feature has been around since the Google Translate app's been available. And as a side note, Bixby's translating features still is being powered by Google Translate anyway, so you're still better off using Google Translate. Where this phone is useful, however, is in multimedia. The AMOLED display is still the best on the market, and it's absolutely better than the iPhone Xs. Marginally, but it still is better than the iPhone Xs. Combine this with a new set of stereo speakers tuned with Dolby Atmos, we have a phone that's an absolute delight to use when we're watching videos, listening to music, and then playing games. But do remember that turn on Dolby Atmos for the best experience. Now, what it doesn't really match up to the Pixel 2 in terms of features, however, is in battery life. Now, despite the S9 Plus's beefier 3500 mAh battery and more power efficient CPU, I could still only squeeze between 4 and 4.5 hours of screen on time with normal heavy regular use, including social media, gaming, web browsing, YouTube video watching, and music streaming as well. And that's compared to the Pixel 2 XL's sort of marginally bigger battery, which does a much better job, regularly hitting between 5.5 to 6 hours of screen on time. But at least there are a bunch of ways to charge the phone up, which is something that we can't say about the Huawei Mate 10. It has both fast charging from the power brick, and it's also got fast wireless charging as well, which is something that's going to be really useful given that the iPhone is going to be bringing wireless charging into the mainstream. Even now, I'm seeing a lot more wireless charging pads popping up here and there at shops, cafes, and for that, the S9 is one of the few phones that's in a great position to take advantage of this. And in another area where the S9 will be closely compared to the Pixel 2, that's in its camera. Samsung has hyped the shit out of the cameras in the S9 and S9 Plus, but does it necessarily mean that it's better? Well, yes and no. From a technical standpoint, there's nothing quite like the S9's. To start off with, the f1.5 aperture in the standard lens is massive. Literally. And it reflects really well in low light photography, being one of the best on the market today. The more new but distracting feature is the new variable aperture. And I say distracting because its actual real world benefit is still up for debate. This feature works in a very nifty way that simulates how DSLRs, mirrorless cameras, or even normal point and shoot cameras utilize their aperture blades. Depending on the lighting condition, the phone will default at either f2.4, and in really low light situations, it'll go for the f1.5 options, and we're talking below 100 lux, almost pitch black. But why does this actually matter? Well, if you've used Galaxy phones in the past, then one of the main complaints about these cameras was that a lot of the photos, even in great lighting, can look a little bit soft. Now, part of it can be due to the image processing, but part of it also due to the fact that due to the much larger apertures that you have on smartphones these days, you still have a fairly small depth of field working with such a big aperture. And if you understand how aperture works in cameras, then you'll know that having a smaller aperture actually improves or broadens the depth of field, making theoretically for a sharper image. So in this case, by stepping it down to f2.4, does it really produce that sharper of an image? Not really. From looking at these photos side by side between f1.5 and f2.4, you can notice that there is a little bit more background blur with an f1.5, but in terms of overall clarity and sharpness, in my opinion, there's not that big of a meaningful difference. You can certainly see that there is a bit of a difference, but in terms of real world use, I'm not sure that it'll matter all that much. And in situations where it's most noticeable is when you're taking photos at a macro level. Sure, you can see a little bit better natural bokeh, but in terms of sharpness, if you've nailed the focus right, it actually looks pretty comparable. But then that's not to say that the image quality is bad, because that couldn't be further from the truth. Photos coming from the S9 and the S9 Plus are sharp, contrasty, and very pleasing to look at. It still exhibits the same image processing artifacts or characteristics that previous Galaxies have. Whether or not you like that is a subjective matter, but I believe it's more toned down even with that in mind. Photos from the S9 aren't quite as saturated and unnatural looking, and some people prefer the look. I like the natural look, so this is a welcome modification for me. Now, in terms of the actual photo taking experience, it's improved now with the new camera UI. It's only a very subtle change, but you can now swipe left or right to toggle different shooting modes, and it's kind of something you'd see in the iPhone. Bit of a copycat move, but at least if done for the sake of usability, I'm all for it. We still have a blazingly fast and accurate dual pixel AF, making it for a very reliable shooting experience. There's also optically stabilized 4K 60 frames per second like in the iPhone 10, and it shoots excellent 1080p at 240 frames per second, which is a feature that's sort of been overlooked thanks to its new super slow-mo mode, where it shoots at 960 frames per second at 720p. This is a bit of a bragging point, but it comes with a lot of caveats. You can only capture it at a very fraction of a a second, and you kind of need a lot of light for it to be anything usable. But when you do get it right, it is a lot of fun. And then finally, we have a selfie camera that's pretty much the same as the S8, which means it's bang on average. Sure, it still has AF, which is something that a lot of phones still don't have, but the odd focal length combined with the odd image processing means that you have a photo that is both soft and sharp in all the wrong places. I can't put my finger on it, but the selfie photos that come out of a lot of these Galaxy cameras, they just don't look quite right. Didn't like how they looked in the S8, and I still don't really like how they look in the S9. But for most people, it'll do the job. Now, one addition to the camera that is welcome is the live focus portrait mode that we saw in the Note 8, which is now in the S9 Plus, thanks to its new telephoto lens. It definitely doesn't detect edges anywhere near as good as, say, a Pixel 2 does, but it is at least on par, if not better, than the iPhone 10. This portrait mode has also been expanded to the selfie camera as well. And in terms of the selfie focus feature, it definitely detects edges better than the iPhone 10 selfie camera as well. Again, not quite as good as the Pixel 2. And you probably get the idea. The S9 absolutely has one of the best cameras on the market this year. It's on par, if not better, than the iPhone 10, but it still doesn't really beat the Pixel 2 in terms of the overall experience, at least in my eyes. But what it doesn't beat the iPhone 10 in regards to features is in animojis, or in Samsung's version, AR emojis. Comparing these two is like chalk and cheese as far as I'm concerned. And Samsung's attempt really is a third world country poverty version of Animoji. Nowhere near as precise, and between the incredibly creepy Bitmoji-esque looking avatars that doesn't really look like the user, and the weird looking animal things which I'm not sure what they're trying to get at, it really isn't worth your time. So overall what we have is pretty much a Galaxy phone that has almost no real compromises. It has a great camera, great internals, great ergonomics, great design, and whilst still expensive at around 1,200 Australian dollars, it has a much more palatable price compared to the iPhone 10, which is pretty much its main competitor, next to the Pixel 2. The only real drawback that I can see, in my opinion, is its battery life, but that is mitigated somewhat due to its charging flexibility. So should you buy this phone? If you own an S8, probably not. But for people with an S7 or older, then 1000% yes, you should buy an S9 or an S9 Plus. It is 100% the most well-rounded flagship on the market today, and probably will be for the rest of the year until the Note 8 arrives, thanks to this little guy, the headphone jack. In any case, what do you guys think? Do you think this phone is worth your time? Or do you think the Pixel 2 or some other Android or iPhone is better than it? Let me know why or why not in the comment section below. If you enjoyed what you saw, now give us a like, and if you haven't already, do consider subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Say good day, Mum, for me. Cheers.